First, a word of explanation. I received a call from the ambassador on Thursday or Friday stating that the new administration coming into Washington has its own plans for Afghanistan, and would the ambassador attend an urgent meeting today, Monday. The ambassador was extremely apologetic. He really did want to come here and promised he would come in the spring. And I almost asked him, why didn't you just say that you were coming to Utah and, and tell President-elect Obama that trumps it? No, I wouldn't say that. But the ambassador did say one thing you're going to find out about my substitute is that you're getting the better part of the deal. And after hearing Mr. Haidari this morning, I think that may be true. He is the DCM, Deputy Chief of Mission. He's the number 2 man at the embassy and the Political Security and Development Affairs Counselor. Just briefly, just to outline highlights, he is the man who has coordinated the government of Afghanistan's defense, security, and law enforcement relations with the U.S. He is the embassy's public diplomacy head in efforts for Afghans' reconstruction. He's the editor of the embassy's monthly newsletter and has published a number of articles in different publications around the United States on politics, security, and post-conflict rebuilding of Afghanistan. He has worked as Federal Relations Specialist, a research analyst, and Assistant Director of Development at Georgetown University, with the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, with the United Nations World Food Program. He has his bachelor's degree in political science from Wabash College. Anybody know where that is? What state? Indiana, outside of Indianapolis. Okay, you go to the head of the class. And his M.A. in Security Studies from the International Security and Development from the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, and also holds the advanced certificates in International Affairs and Refugee and Humanitarian Emergencies from Georgetown. And you'll find him an extremely engaging speaker and with a great PowerPoint presentation. Let's welcome him.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Dr. Butler. I'd like to thank your university and as well as Dr. Peterson and your university for hosting today's luncheon. I really enjoyed the discussion on various issues and as well as, of course, being here with the students. That's what I enjoyed the most. That reminds me of my own days at school, going to these lectures, listening and discussing questions. I have a really long PowerPoint presentation, and I'll try to cut down on it because I know your time is short. So I'll move through it faster and allow more time for Q&A, because I'd like to hear from you, because you are, the fresh minds in conducting research, writing papers, and are more critical. And I'd like to learn from you as much as you learn from this presentation. So I'd like to discuss security, reconstruction, and governance in Afghanistan, challenges and opportunities, as well as also achievements. Okay, just some photos to share with you of Afghanistan and see how much it looks like Utah. And, of course, answering that central question of where we are 7 years on in the state-building process in Afghanistan. Here's an overview. We will briefly discuss land and people, achievements in the political, social, economic areas, challenges, all of those, security, narcotics, governance, lack of strategic coordination of aid implementation in Afghanistan, as well as challenges from the region, in particular from Pakistan. Opportunities where we think we should take advantage of our the following. I don't want to read it. And then the way forward. Of course, the value of nation neglecting, nation building, in fact, or the cost of nation neglecting based on our recent past. Afghanistan is about the size of Texas or the size of France. We're about 26 to 30 million population. There's not been a census since 70s. Of course, we have been at the crossroad of rich civilizations, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam, and with a long history, some 5,000 years. And of course, that makes us culturally very diverse. So there are some 55 different ethnic groups in Afghanistan, with 5 major ethnic groups: Pashtuns. I don't know if this is a pointer, but maybe not. But Pashtuns are in the south and east of Afghanistan. Tajiks in the central, northeast, north, and Hazaras in central Afghanistan, and the Turkmens and Uzbeks in northwest of Afghanistan. We have been strategically located, of course, before the Cold War between the British and Russian empires. If we recall, the Great Game, Afghanistan was sandwiched between the two competing empires, and then during the Cold War between the Soviets and the West and the Muslim world. And now, of course, we are the front line in the war against terrorism. Afghanistan, we have been called a poor country, least developed. That's true, but at the same time, we are very resourceful, and we have those different types of natural resources. Copper, we are the second largest reserves in the world. The Chinese just invested $3.4 billion in the copper. We have natural gas and petroleum in northern Afghanistan, much more than that was estimated or forecast by the Soviets. And we have minerals and precious and semi-precious stones. Okay. Just achievements. Of course, before, make it easy. We recall that during 80s, the Soviets were occupying Afghanistan, supporting a communist regime, and the West and the United States supporting the Mujahideen resistance fighters who were based in Pakistan that eventually defeated the Soviets, and the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, and the communist regime fell in Afghanistan in 1992, I believe, and then the Mujahideen took over, but they divided along ethno-religious lines, and they started fighting each other. So that basically led to state collapse in Afghanistan, which created a vacuum for the Taliban to emerge and, of course, to be created by the Pakistani army and intelligence to achieve their strategic goals in the region. Of course, the Taliban achieved that objective of Pakistan, but at the same time they were becoming a problem by allowing Al-Qaeda and as well as victimizing and terrorizing the Afghan people, restricting women to homes, not allowing them to go to school or work outside their homes. And so we were basically the prime victim of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda before 9/11 happened. And the reason why is because the world disengaged from Afghanistan after the Soviets left and the communist regime failed, and communism collapsed, of course, as an ideology, and so Afghanistan lost its strategic importance. So these regional players felt the vacuum and fought their proxy conflicts until, of course, 9/11. When 9/11 happened, it re-engaged the United States and its allies. And through the Bonn Agreement process, which happened in Bonn, Germany in 2001, Afghan political factions and parties were brought together by the United Nations to chart a political roadmap for establishing a government in Afghanistan, which happened, of course, and we went through the process and created those institutions, the interim regime, the transitional government. The constitution was adopted, which paved the way for presidential elections in 2004 and then parliamentary elections in 2005. So that was the last objective of the Bonn process that basically completed the process of creating state institutions, at least in name. And of course that, well, I think, anyways, I think I lost my track, but I was going to talk about the three key institutions, executive, legislative, and judicial, that were created. And of course, the major gain was for the women of Afghanistan, the fact that women were guaranteed 27% of the seats from 64 seats. That's more than seats in the U.S. Congress and the British Parliament, which is a good start for the women of Afghanistan. And as far as, of course, reconstruction is concerned, we were able to build a national ring road, which connects the center to periphery and periphery to 6 neighboring countries, which has helped boost the economy in Afghanistan and connect Afghanistan for the first time with the neighbors. In the area of social development, we've been able to expand both education, primary education in particular, as well as secondary, and access to healthcare throughout much of Afghanistan. And as a result, we're saving thousands of lives of women and children, something, of course, that was a major problem under the Taliban. There were no clinics, no hospitals, really no basic health care to begin with. Those are some statistics, and here are some graphs of how access to health care has increased from 2001 to 2004 and up to now. Education, we talked about economic development. Again, our economy has been growing double-digit since 2001, and it's now stabilizing at about around 8 to 10% agriculture. More land is now irrigated, cultivated, and producing more grains for domestic consumption. And of course, livestock, the number is rising and has, of course, been receiving treatment from UN agencies. Industry, as I pointed out in the beginning, is our main hope, and that we would be able to exploit our natural resources for both domestic consumption as well as export to grow our economy on the long run. Trade has increased between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Under the Taliban, we had a trade of around $30 million a year. Now that's about $1.2 billion and increasing. And so is the situation with Iran. A declining percentage of economy is, of course, the drug economy in Afghanistan in 2002. I don't know if you can see the figures. They're not visible. It used to be more than half of our economy. Now it has, of course, declined year by year as our illicit economy has grown. But, of course, narcotics remains a problem. These are, of course, our achievements, but that's not to say that we are not facing major challenges as a result of course, first, a lack of resources to consolidate our achievements, and secondly, because of presence of external safe sanctuaries for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Pakistan that destabilize Afghanistan. The Afghan people basically demand just basic law and order and security. They're resilient. They're enterprising. They will not starve if, of course, we don't give them everything we as humans desire. They're very basic expectations. But unfortunately, the situation on the ground is really deteriorating, particularly in the south and east provinces that border Pakistan, from where the Taliban launched terrorist attacks against international Afghan security forces, and as well as also targeting, threatening, and intimidating civilians to basically create division between people and the government, to bring people on their side, and over time create a cause for their insurgency and topple the government, and as well as throughout the international security forces out of Afghanistan. That's their strategic aim. Who's responsible? Of course, not only Taliban and Al-Qaeda. They're not an alternative to the current government by any means. They don't have any visionary leaders with a visionary agenda for state building or nation building in Afghanistan. Their aim is basically to derail this rebuilding process and to to terrorize and victimize the Afghan people again. Al-Qaeda is basically the manager or the leader in terms of training and providing technical know-how and propaganda resources to the Taliban, or kind of these foot soldiers and fighting their war against Afghanistan and our international allies. Then also criminals, of course, warlords and spoilers, and narco traffickers, all kind of in a marriage of convenience, because they all benefit from instability in Afghanistan. And so they're very beneficial to each other. Escalation of violence as a result, of course, of our inability to extend the reach of the Afghan government to south and east. The Taliban have been able to fill that gap, and as a result, they have been able to mount terrorist attacks against civilian and military targets. Those are the figures. I don't want to read them. And here's a chart. Those are divided along regional commands of east, south, and west, and north, and in each of those, the number of attacks has been on the rise, and particularly in RC East, or Regional Command East, which has seen the highest number of attacks over the past year or so. Suicide attacks have been on the rise. If you look at 2002 to where we are now, I think that figure for 2008 is, I think, until September, I believe, and that has been also on the rise. IED attacks, that's improvised explosive devices, has been on the rise across south and east of Afghanistan. They're more lethal and destructive in terms of tearing apart military armored vehicles, and as a result killing more international security forces, and as well as Afghan forces. Civilian casualties have been on the rise, unfortunately, because of high altitude air bombing by the coalition forces, because we don't have enough boots on the ground, and so they resort to air bombardment. Because the Taliban operate out of civilian areas, inevitably these bombs kill more civilians than the Taliban, which again, plays to the advantage of the Taliban by alienating people from the government and international security forces, and creating resentment among people against us. Solutions are, of course, to focus on human intelligence, to launch more commando attacks, and to stay in the area and where civilian casualties happen, apologize and provide assistance. These, unfortunately, have not happened much, and to the extent that not the Taliban have been gaining much from that. More on that, going through that. Narcotics is a problem of poverty, weak governance, and insecurity. It is a cause and effect, and here are some causes of why we are the largest producer of opium, poppy, and heroin in the world. Of course, we have limited law enforcement. Government is really weak. We're not present, particularly in the south and east. And now cultivation and production is now isolated to 5 southwestern provinces in Afghanistan. Judicial capacity is extremely weak. And more than important than all of those causes is global demand. Global demand is rising in Western Europe and North America, and as well as also in the region, in Russia and Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Central Europe, and Western Europe is the end market for Afghan drugs in Afghanistan. Fighting narcotics, these are the provinces that produce opium, poppy. We have gone from 13 drug-free provinces to 18 now, which we consider a success, and we should maintain that. We have those institutions, several institutions created to fight narcotics. But I always say that if we don't train them, equip them, and pay them, then they also become part of the drug business, unfortunately. Weak governance is another challenge in Afghanistan, and it's primarily because of weak judicial and police systems, which are the eyes and hands of any government and the world, that if you don't have those institutions effectively working with one another, then of course the government is not very legitimate, and that's corruption equals monopoly plus discretion minus accountability. That's what's ruling most of the institutions in Afghanistan. And narcotics, because of lots of money associated with it, is corrupting the government and institutions. Nonetheless, we're not the most corrupt government. It's a post-conflict government with meager resources, and yet there are more corrupt governments in the world. We hope that will change. And I was going to talk about, of course, parallel to the bond process, there was a security sector reform. I don't know how to back up. Maybe this one. Yes. Parallel to the bond process, this was the strategy that was adopted, a lead nation strategy for state building or nation building in Afghanistan. In most other post-conflict situations, as you may know from your research, the United Nations does the nation building in East Timor and Kosovo and Bosnia and all of those situations. In Afghanistan, they decided that these lead nations should take over those key and very challenging tasks. But unfortunately, with the exception of the United States, the rest have not followed through or not brought the level of resources and commitment needed to implement those important tasks and to strategically coordinate, because they're so interconnected and related, to make the impact that we need in terms of creating state institutions and enabling them to do their jobs, providing basic law and order and security across Afghanistan. Progress has been meager. I'll skip that. Here is the reason why. That compared to other post-conflict societies, Afghanistan has received the least amount of aid, both security and development, per capita. That has now, of course, increased slightly and will increase, of course, with the new administration in the United States. But compared to other situations, we have received much less aid per capita. And here is a snapshot of how much other countries have received versus, particularly Iraq, versus Afghanistan. And much of what we have gotten has been spent on military operations. So there's some 20% of aid has been committed or devoted to reconstruction. Under reconstruction, everything falls, from judicial reform to human rights issues to governance and so on and so forth. There's so many things under reconstruction, but that's not enough for the needs of Afghanistan. Some pledges in the recent Paris Donors Conference in France. We hope those pledges will be dispersed and be channeled through government institutions, so they will be coordinated to ensure aid effectiveness in Afghanistan. Just give you an example of how international aid is spent in Afghanistan. We don't get the resources. The resources go to NGOs and international contractors. Those are donor related. So they end up spending much of their money on their own services, on the people they recruit from abroad, on the expense of consultants. And as a result, our people get, say, under to $200 versus how much the Taliban pay. If you get a job with an NGO as a driver, you make more than what our engineer makes. So if you're an engineer, you have a large family to support, then you would ideally get a job with an NGO as a cook or a driver. That's basically wasting resources and, of course, not enabling the government to stand on its own feet. The cost of an international soldier is about $2,000 a day. Imagine how many soldiers, Afghan soldiers, we can support and maintain with that amount if we, Afghanize the security reform or sector in Afghanistan. Perceptions of corruption in Afghanistan. Everyone has paid bribe. Of course, I don't want to. Paid a bribe to get service. but the problem is dysfunctional corruption or big corruption tied to the drug dealing that needs to be fought. And the strategic coordination is another problem or challenge, which I just pointed out that it's good to have good consensus of those countries to be present in Afghanistan, but those countries, of course, bring lots of problems too, and they don't talk to each other, they don't work together, and so as a result, they waste a lot of resources by not doing so. Oops. Here is just a snapshot of PRT's, Provincial Reconstruction Teams in Afghanistan. Some are good, a lot of them are not, unfortunately. And this can be a presentation on it itself because they don't have the resources or they don't have the training and they don't connect with the local people and local state institutions to do their jobs effectively. So more or less they're there just for the sake of being there, not doing their jobs. And U.S., of course, PRTs are an exception because they are resourceful, they have good training, and they are working with the government and people of Afghanistan. Dangerous neighborhood is another challenge. Of course, I pointed out Pakistan is a major problem, providing safe sanctuaries for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. That's our #1 problem, security. If security is resolved, then the rest will be taken care of. But since the Taliban are provided a safe sanctuary where they get trained and ideologically indoctrinated and financed, they basically come across the border, launch attacks, and they run back. So it's really, we are fighting an endless war unless we get Pakistanis to sincerely cooperate in the war against terrorism. And that means, of course, the military and intelligence establishment that is effectively the government there. Regional factors, we talked about opportunities are there, and the fact is that we have a clear strategy to win the war in Afghanistan. And the most important asset in the fight against terrorism and extremism in Afghanistan is the Afghan people. The Afghan people strongly support international presence in Afghanistan. They perceive international forces as liberators, not occupiers, like we did, the Soviets. And so we want the international community to stay and to help do the job together with us. And as a military strategy, we are a strong proponent of clearing an area of the Taliban and then holding that area by standing up security, law enforcement, and social and economic institutions so they basically deliver services to people like a normal government to provide public goods. And then build. So those institutions are sustainable. Those, of course, local communities and villages over time develop and become self-sustaining. And, of course, we propose that the security sector should be Afghanized, that Afghan National Police and Army should be trained and equipped to do the job because they're not only cost-effective but also save the lives of our allies of forces in Afghanistan. National reconciliation, we think also dialogue is to be a part of a broad strategy to win the peace in Afghanistan. And of course, as long as the Taliban accept the Afghan constitution as a precondition and to renounce violence and to lay down their weapons and choose a civilian life, they're welcome to join us. And we've been able to bring some 5,000 Taliban on our side. And this process ongoing. We also have a national development strategy. Sorry, I'll just fast forward. I just want to show you because it is a strategy on which we worked some, I think, 2-3 years. It has 3 pillars: security, governance, rule of law, and human rights, economic and social development. It has, I think, about 8 sectors and then 5 cross-cutting areas. And it is also costed and was discussed at the recent Paris Donors Conference. and we ask the international community to help us implement this development strategy. In a way, it's our Marshall Plan for post-conflict Afghanistan. And we believe that if we implement this strategy, we could, of course, win the peace in Afghanistan. Why is it important to stay engaged in Afghanistan? It's a key question. Of course, we know security is globalized. I'm sure you're conducting research and you know how important it is to keep the momentum in Afghanistan and to truly secure the country today and secure its future, because it is, of course, in a volatile and yet geopolitically important part of the world where Afghanistan is and will be United States' strategic ally. And we have achieved significant goals, which as I pointed out, need to be consolidated so we can have this enduring strategic partnership, one that would enable us to stand on our own feet and be an active member of the international community, one that contributes to peace and security in the world. Public opinion, as I pointed out, is very good towards international presence in Afghanistan. We understand that the minute the international community is gone, the Taliban, we already know, are outside Kabul, and they will basically take over and basically plunge the country back into violence and terrorism and chaos. So the Taliban are not an alternative for the Afghan people. They want us to stay there and get the job done. And here just a comparative comparison of where we were 7 years ago and where we are today. We have definitely come a long way. Those are key strategic objectives with, I think, some $30 billion that we have invested over the past 7 years. That's all assistance given to Afghanistan. And so we have achieved milestones. What can you do? Of course, you as students can of course, inform and shape U.S. foreign policy. And, of course, you will be future leaders, too. And you will have learned from your past relationship with Afghanistan that disengaging prematurely from countries like Afghanistan will come back and haunt us, the blowback effect. And so it's important for the United States to remain in these countries, to build peace, because peace is, is going to serve our own national security interests. Thank you. And I'd like to get your questions. Thank you. Thanks.
Now, we have time for questions, but may I ask you, if you ask a question, to wait till the microphone gets to you. We're recording this for broadcast on our web. So Morgan back here has the microphone.
Sure.
Hi. My name is Wade Hansen, Mesa major, Middle East Studies. And my question was, in Iraq there's a lot of sectarian violence. Is there the same sort of thing in Afghanistan? Do the Uzbeks and the Tajiks and the Pashtuns, do they get along, or is that an obstacle that we have to get over? And if it is an obstacle, in which ways does it manifest itself?
No, not in Afghanistan. Of course, the sectarian issue is not a problem as it was in Iraq or still is in Iraq. And also, ethnically, Afghanistan is very diverse. On the grassroots level, people do coexist, do get along. There are lots of intermarriages. But ethnicity or ethnic diversity, as we all know, is a peacetime good. But of course a wartime disadvantage, because ethnic diversity can of course turn into ethnic differences by players in Afghanistan that try to destabilize Afghanistan, playing one ethnic group against the other. And it's also in case of Afghanistan, sometimes it's the demagogues of those different ethnic groups that try to basically appeal to the issue of ethnicity and ethnic identity to promote themselves and their self-interest, which is not really in the interest of the Afghan nation, a nation of diverse ethnic groups, one with a strong ethnic or national identity. Sure.
John Witten, Archaeology. What has been the emphasis of local governments over a broader? Do the provinces have local institutions of townships and those? And what's the emphasis in your written constitution about giving power? What's the distribution of power, I guess you could say?
Local institutions remain weak, unfortunately, in Afghanistan has a history of weak local governance. In the past, we used to have a strong center loosely connected with provincial governments, like state governments here. And those provincial governors are even not connected with a district level or village level governments or source of governance. And so the process right now in Afghanistan is how to strengthen the center, the central government on the one hand, and the provincial governments on the other, and then connect them, the two, together, and then as well as with the district and village level. This is, of course, a long-term process that we need to start as soon as possible, because most of the Afghan population live in rural areas. And the districts and villages, and that's where we need to be present and need to be providing basic services to people. As I pointed out, to the extent that we have not been able to do so, particularly in the south and east, the Taliban have been able to fill that vacuum and be present and provide incentives such as recruiting jobless youth to join their ranks and fight the government, or to provide protection for opium poppy cultivation or drug production and smuggling. So those are the kinds of incentives at least the Taliban offer to people. If you were living there and you had a large family which you needed to support, and the only source of livelihood was opium poppy cultivation, the government was absent and didn't have the resources to protect and help you, of course, out of mere concern for your safety and survival of your family, then you would probably join the Taliban or at least remain passive. So we hope that from this point on, we definitely gave more attention and resources to strengthening state institutions, not only in the center but also on the local level. And there are now several strategic reviews of how to secure Afghanistan are going on, and this part of social outreach and strengthening local governance is at the heart of these strategies that need to be addressed.
John Hone, International Relations. Question I have is, one of my friends, he actually served in Afghanistan, and he said that he was with the Corps of Engineers, and he said that while he was there, one of the biggest problems that he ran into were people who hadn't had what we would probably consider necessities, just running water, electricity, stuff like that. And he said that they didn't have it, and they didn't really understand what it was, and they didn't really want them there because they didn't understand that. Is that...
Yeah, it's a fair assessment of the situation. People don't have the basic necessities. We have some 5 million refugees who have come back from Pakistan and Iran, hoping, of course, that their lives would change, at least in Pakistan and Iran, that electricity, maybe not full day, but at least 10, 15 hours. We have some 3 hours of electricity in Kabul, let alone provincial centers and villages and districts, no electricity, maybe not even an hour. And the electricity that they do get I think, from 10 o'clock at night, and it blacks out at midnight or even later. So at a time when people are asleep. And so running water is a problem from beginning, and especially over the past 2.5 decades, that irrigation systems were destroyed, canals were destroyed, and not many of these have been rebuilt, especially in the south and east. So the very basics are not in place in much of Afghanistan, unfortunately. And also we need to realize that Afghanistan was the least developed country even before these conflicts started, before the Soviet invasion. And then years of conflict that destroyed much of what we had built through the subsidies we got from the Soviets. And so right now what we are doing in Afghanistan is building everything from ground up, not rebuilding. There is not much to be rebuilt, but there is so much that needs to be built from ground up. And so resources, you look at how much we have been given and how we have been given. Much of the resources have been given to donor-related NGOs and contractors. If you look at the contracting business of the donor community, you will see that there are multiple layers of contracting. Each layer of contracting basically skims 30% of the donated money that is given in the names of the Afghan people. And when Afghans hear that billions of dollars have been given to Afghanistan, but they don't know how that's given and how it's spent, and now 7 years on, when they see that not much has happened and not much has changed in their lives, they begin questioning, where is this money going? And then they come up with all sorts of conspiracy theories. Are we part of the solution in Afghanistan or part of the problem? And so that's why it's so important to really get Afghanistan back on the track. And it's important to note that, of course, as much as we achieved those milestones in Afghanistan, we were also diverted from getting the job done in Afghanistan by the events in Iraq, which sapped resources and attention for the past 4 or 5 years. And so the need for recommitting and refocusing on Afghanistan, which the new administration, President-elect Obama, is very committed to, and the Afghan government or people are looking forward to partnering with the new administration to basically consolidate our achievements and to win the peace in Afghanistan that is good for us and the United States and the world.
Dallin Chainer, International Relations. At this point in the war on terror, is the civilian support for the Taliban increasing or decreasing? And also, what populations do the Taliban draw, or ethnic populations or groups of people do the Taliban draw their support from?
Well, support for the Taliban is not active. If it is passive, and I discussed the reason why. The reason why people might passively support the Taliban is because of our absence and our weakness, particularly in some 60 plus districts where the Afghan government is not very much present and lacks the resources to provide effective basic services, law and order and security. And so as we've filled the gap, then of course people will come back on our side. Still, more than 70% of the Afghan people support overwhelmingly international presence in Afghanistan and their international and their forces in Afghanistan, because as I pointed out, the Taliban are no alternative. Their comeback. Their comeback is there because people cannot do anything. If you live in the south and east of Afghanistan, you're threatened. You could be killed. Your family could be, targeted at any time. So you just keep quiet to survive and be safe. But that doesn't mean that you support the Taliban. Of course, once the Taliban is effectively there and your human security is ensured, you know about the safety of your family tomorrow and the day after and the following week and the next month, you would definitely be on the side of the government. Of course, freedom, democracy, those are all great promises and offer so much potentially. But we need to provide the resources to create institutions to maintain democracy and to deliver on the promise of democracy. And our democracy here in the United States just didn't happen. It took you time, it took you efforts, it took you leadership to develop the kind of democracy we are in today. And so we shouldn't take it for granted here, of course, but of course neither should we falter on supporting the democratization process in Afghanistan and our region, in Pakistan, of course, civilianizing the government and strengthening, deepening democratization process, so that when, of course, we know from theories of democratic peace that democracies don't fight each other. And so that's the hope, that if Pakistan is democratic and we are democratic and our other neighbors are democratic, that we will focus on economic prosperity and development and regional economic integration, like, post-World War Europe. And so that's good, but we need to remain committed to it and make it happen as we did, in case of post-World War II Europe. Marshall Plan did it. And that's what we need in Afghanistan, nothing short of a Marshall Plan, something that we were discussing and talking about in the aftermath of the 9/11 and the fall of the Taliban. But over time we faltered and we got busy elsewhere. And now it's time to recommit and get back. We have a Marshall Plan, Afghanistan National Development Strategy. It may not be a perfect strategy, but we can work on it and implement it with your support. Thank you.